The winter sky stretched pale and fragile, like cracked porcelain over the silent valley. A river, frozen and brittle, wound its way through the white landscape, glassy and still beneath a quilt of snow. The air carried a silence so deep it seemed to hold its breath. Along the icy bank, a figure stumbled slender and shivering, her breath rising in frosted puffs as she pressed forward with trembling resolve. Elsie Marrow clutched her newborn daughter, Juniper, close against her chest. Her fingers numb beneath thin gloves, her heart a slow, desperate drum beneath the heavy weight of exhaustion and fear. The baby's small cry, muffled beneath layers of wool, was the fragile sound that tethered her to this frozen world. Even as the cold seemed determined to steal her away, she had come to Scarlet Hollow only weeks before. The kind of place where whispers outnumbered friends and the wind carried stories sharper than any blade. They called her many names, the girl with no past. The woman who brought trouble, their voices edged with judgment like the biting cold that seeped through her threadbare coat. No one offered warmth, only glances that lingered too long, like shadows refusing to fade. Her story was known and yet unknown, a man who had vanished like smoke before dawn, leaving behind only promises broken and a child born into hardship. She had carried more than just the weight of her daughter on the long journey west. She bore the silent burden of shame, woven tightly around her soul. The town was a crucible of eyes, their suspicion pressing down on her like the heavy snow atop the surrounding pines. Despite the frost, Elsie moved with quiet determination, the soft crunch of her boots the only sound in the frozen morning. She sought the mercantile, where the warmth of the stove offered scant comfort. Inside, the women clustered near the fire, their laughter cutting through the cold like knives. When Elsie approached, their smiles faltered, and one muttered loud enough to chill more than the wind. Those fallen women always bring the coldest winds with them. The sting of those words settled deep beneath her ribs, mingling with the ache of hunger and sleepless nights. Juniper whimpered softly, her tiny hands clutching at Elsie's coat. The mother's fingers tightened, drawing her child closer, a small shield against the unspoken cruelty around her. From the doorway, a shadow stirred Colt Harrow. He had lived on the edge of the mountain for years, a man carved from the wilderness itself. To Scarlet Hollow's people, he was a mystery, a ghost with eyes like storm clouds and a voice seldom heard but deeply felt. Colt's gaze lingered on Elsie for a moment, silent and steady, before the shifting crowd swallowed her figure again. Later, when Elsie stumbled on the slick stone steps outside, Colt's rough hand found her arm before she fell. His touch was firm, steady, a lifeline she hadn't known she'd needed. Without a word, he bent to retrieve a glove that had slipped from her grasp and placed it gently into her palm. Their eyes met briefly, hers wide with surprise. His steady and unyielding hand, something fragile and unspoken passed between them, like a whisper caught in the wind. The town's gossip grew louder with the coming storm. Whispers painted her as reckless, a woman doomed by her own choices. Yet in Colt's silence, there was a protection not offered by anyone else, an unspoken promise that she was seen, not as a scandal, but as a soul struggling against the cold and cruelty. Days grew shorter, and the biting chill seeped into every corner of Elsie's small, rented shack. The thin walls creaked under the weight of winter's breath, and the fire sputtered low as she sat stitching tattered cloth to make blankets for Juniper. Each needle's pull was slow and deliberate, a meditation against the rising tide of loneliness. The baby's soft coos filled the room, a fragile melody amidst the harshness of the world outside. A memory surfaced, a voice, warm and distant, her mother's words echoing across the years. Winter reveals what we truly are. Elsie pressed the thought away, unsure if she was brave or broken, strong or simply stubborn enough to survive. One bitter morning, Necessity forced her toward the river. The town's path was shorter if she crossed the ice, but the frozen surface groaned beneath her cautious steps. Wrapped tightly in blankets, Juniper slept in her arms, oblivious to the danger beneath. As Elsie stepped forward, the sharp crack of splintering ice shattered the stillness. Time slowed, her heart hammered as the cold water rushed up to meet her, swallowing her breath, dragging her beneath the icy surface. Darkness pressed in, cold and cruel. But Elsie's arms tightened instinctively around Juniper. Her world narrowed to the warmth of the child's small body against hers. The desperate hope that she could hold on long enough to live, from the tree line. Colt's voice broke through the silence, raw and urgent. His boots pounded snow as he raced toward the river, heedless of the danger. Without hesitation, he plunged into the freezing water. A solitary figure against the unforgiving winter. Determined to save what mattered most, and so it began the winter when a mountain man leapt into the river, and a mother fought the cold to protect her child. Their stories entwined beneath the pale light of dawn, caught between survival and hope, waiting for what the thaw might bring. The river's icy grip loosened only reluctantly as Colt Harrow's strong arms broke through the frozen surface, reaching blindly in the shadowed depths for the fragile form he sought. His breath came ragged, but his movements were sure, calculated and relentless against the biting current. His fingers closed around Elsie's soaked coat, and with a fierce pull, he brought her and Juniper closer to the shimmering surface where the cold air fought for their breath. Elsie's body was numb, yet the warmth of her child in her arms was a fierce beacon, the only thing tethering her to life. Colt surfaced beside them, the wind cutting through his soaked clothes, but his grip never faltered. Together, they broke the water's cruel hold, stumbling onto the jagged, snow-covered bank where the world seemed to hold its breath once more. Colt's cabin was a refuge carved from the wilderness, modest shelter lined with the scent of pine and earth. Amber light flickering from the hearth. He moved with quiet urgency, laying Juniper near the fire, her cheeks flushed with the first soft glow of warmth. Elsie sank beside the hearth, trembling, wrapped in thick blankets, her teeth chattering with the lingering chill. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. It was the space where trust began to stretch tentative fingers. Her voice broke like fragile ice when she whispered, "I'm sorry for the trouble." But Colt's eyes held no judgment, only a steady calm that seemed to say the world had never truly seen her before. When he brushed wet strands of hair from her forehead, his touch was gentle. A silent promise that this night, at least, she was not alone. The fire crackled, shadows dancing softly across weathered walls as Elsie allowed herself to sink into a moment of fragile peace. Memories pressed against her mind, her mother's words echoing still. Winter reveals what we truly are, here. Beside this quiet man carved from stone and solitude, she began to understand that she might be more than the cold and whispered rumors. Colt's voice, low and unadorned, finally spoke. "I've known what it's like to be cast out. Lost a brother once felt like the whole world turned its back." His confession was sparse, but heavy with meaning, the unspoken weight of shared scars drawing them closer. Elsie's tears came quietly, shame meeting resilience in a fragile dance that neither dared name aloud. Before dawn, a visitor arrived, Drogan Tate, a friend of Colt's from the ridge, bringing supplies for the coming storm. His words were blunt and carried the harsh judgment of the town. Rumors that Elsie's fall was reckless, that she was unfit to raise her child alone in the unforgiving winter. Elsie overheard and trembled, the cold fear she had fought so hard to hold at bay, creeping back like a shadow. Colt sat beside her without speaking, offering presence over empty comfort. The simple act of staying a bum more powerful than words. In that quiet room, warmed by fire and unspoken understanding, Elsie's resolve began to harden. She would no longer hide beneath the weight of shame or bend to the cruel judgment of the world. She wanted to stand, to face the biting wind with dignity, for Juniper's sake and her own. When she spoke, her voice was steady, carrying the soft strength of one who had been broken but was not defeated. Colt reached out, offering his coat a silent pledge that they would face what came together. There was no grand declaration, only the quiet promise held in a shared glance, a gentle tightening of hands. The storm fell heavy around them as they set out toward Scarlet Hollow, snow thick and muffling the world into a sacred hush. Juniper slept warm against Colt's chest, her soft breaths a rhythm that anchored them. Elsie matched Colt's stride, step for step, no longer a lone figure, burdened by shame, but a woman walking toward a future she would claim. The town awaited, wrapped in whispers and wary eyes. Colt's return, after months of solitude, drew a curious silence, a tension crackling like the winter air. Elsie stepped forward, her posture steady, voice clear and unwavering. "A mother isn't a scandal. A child isn't a curse," she said, words simple yet fierce enough to still the harshest tongues. The crowd shifted. Some faces softened, others hardened, but Colt's presence behind Elsie was like an unyielding shield. Without a word, his quiet strength silenced the murmurs, offering her a dignity once denied. Then, in a small, unexpected act of grace, a woman from the mercantile approached with folded bundles of baby clothes, an offering of acceptance and humanity. As the gathering dispersed, Colt walked Elsie and Juniper back to her home, the air lighter now, though still cold. She looked to him and asked if he would disappear again into the mountains. Colt reached into his pocket and produced a small carved wooden rattle-ruff, yet crafted with care. Without speaking, he handed it to her. Elsie's smile was slow, full of warmth and understanding, their connection no longer bound by words, but by quiet gestures and shared strength. The transformation was subtle, but profound. A woman once shunned now held her head high, a mother no longer hidden, but embraced. A mountain man no longer alone, but a guardian of fragile hope. Their story was one of survival and redemption, not told through grand declarations, but through the small, tender acts that define us. Some winters test what the heart is made of, and some teach us that even the coldest river cannot drown a spirit guarded by love, courage, and the gentle hands of those who choose to stay. If this tale warmed a corner of your wintered heart, subscribe for more stories that remind us we are never as alone as we fear.